A pleasant morning to everyone. Good morning. Last June, through the help and effort and generosity of the president of the Toastmasters Club, Zamboanga, we were given the chance to train some selected pastors from the Alliance in the area of public speaking. And when we were there, I also joined them, but I wasn't there as a delegate to the training. But I was there as one who organized the event. So I did not even sign up in the list of the delegates earlier at the entrance of the training venue. So I was there, and then we were informed by the moderator that in the Toastmasters practice, every meeting, you will be given the chance to have an impromptu speaking, wherein a topic will be given to you, and the topic will be read before you, and right after the topic is read, the microphone is given to you so that you can begin speaking about the subject matter. And I was there, and then I began to listen to those individuals who spoke already. It was an impressive moment that a person would have the courage to really take the challenge of speaking right away after you heard the subject matter. So, towards the end of the first session, because there were two sessions, towards the end of the first session, I was actually surprised that my name was called. And so I went in front. My heart was pumping fast. My legs were shaking, and my hands were so cold. And then one of the audience told me, parang kinakabahan si Pastor. Sa totoo lang, kinakabahan talaga ako. Sabi nila, kakabahan ka pa ba? Sanay ka na. Sa totoo lang, every Sunday, habang nandyan ako sa upuan, towards the end of the last song, may kaba talaga sa dibdib. By the time I get the mic and begin speaking, may kaba sa dibdib. Nawawala lang siya after a couple of minutes. So yung kaba nandyan talaga, ito yung sabi nila na, walay maayong laki sa public speaking. Everyone, if not all siguro, about 99% are scared to speak in front of the crowd. And so we were there. I was given the topic was read before me, and then the moderator said, you can now begin. And so I delivered a speech based on my own knowledge and perception about the subject matter that was given. I did not feel the fear, that kind of fear that I felt at that moment before. I could not imagine, or I could not recall any moment in my life where my legs were trembling, my hands so cold, and my heart was beating so fast in front of the people. I was so scared. And that kind of feeling was the exact emotions that was experienced by the inhabitants of Jericho. They were so scared, probably more than what I felt, because the only thing that made me so afraid is I might commit a mistake and I might put myself to shame in front of the public. But that time, in the Old Testament, based on the text that we would be looking at today, the people inhabiting Jericho were so scared, not because they might be ashamed or put to shame, but they were so scared because God's people were already on their way, coming into their place to annihilate them and totally destroy the whole city. They were so scared, and that emotions was flowing through the text that we will be looking at this morning. So I would read before you Joshua chapter 2, beginning with verse 15 up to verse 24. Our passage for this message is actually the entire chapter of the book of Joshua. But we would be reading only from verses 15 to 24 so that it won't take so much of our time. Okay, Joshua chapter 2, beginning with verse 15 from the NASB. It says here, Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. She said to them, Go to the hill country so that the pursuers will not happen upon you. and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way." The men said to her, "We shall be free from this oath to you which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land, you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and your father's household. It shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in your house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear." She said, "According to your word, so be it." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and came to the hill country, and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. Now the pursuers had sought them all along the road, but had not found them. Then the 2 men returned and came down from the hill country and crossed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun. And they related to him all that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us. May the good Lord bless the reading of His word." For us to have an understanding about what we read, I'll tell you the story in the earlier verses. Joshua was leading Israel by this time. Moses was already taken by God. Remember, they came out of Egypt. Moses became the instrument of God to free his people from the hands of the Egyptians. But along the way, they spent many decades on the wilderness, because their hearts were stubborn and their hearts were not ready to possess the land that God has promised for them. Sometimes we don't receive what we are asking, even if God wanting to give it to us already, because our hearts are not actually ready to receive it. So this time the Israelites were not yet ready to receive it because of their stubborn hearts. And so they wandered in the wilderness for many years, and Moses was taken by God when they were in the wilderness. And because of that, his successor should take the lead, and that was in the person of Joshua. Now Joshua was leading God's children. They already passed through the land of Edom. They were now entering the land of promise, but they were on the other side of the Jordan River. And what happened next was Joshua sent 2 spies because they need to pass through Jericho. Jericho is a fortified city. Jericho is a strong place that the city walls were considered to be indestructible that time with the known weapons in those days. And so they need to pass through Jericho. They need to destroy the place in order for them to conquer the other cities in the land of promise. And so what happened was Joshua sent 2 spies to watch the city and observe about the things happening there, if it is really possible for them to attack already. And so 2 spies were sent. When the 2 spies arrived Jericho, they went to a very unlikely place, if we think about it today. Why I said unlikely? Because when they arrived in the city, they entered into the house, an inn, handled and managed by a harlot or a prostitute. The name of the harlot was Rahab. So I was asking when I read that portion of the text, why did they enter the house of a harlot? And I found out, based on my study also, that the house of Rahab, the inn, the house of the harlot, was a natural place for foreigners. In other words, when foreigners would come to Jericho, many of them would pass through that house and sleep. And there were other houses like that all around the city. And many of the foreigners would visit houses like that, especially if you are a spy. And because these 2 were spies, they went into the house of the harlot so that they would be able to follow the advice of Joshua, because Joshua told them, you watch and see and try to find out what you could get out of the city, some information that we need. But you have to be very discreet. And so they were there in the house of the harlot. At least they would be less conspicuous in this visit in the city. Now, what happened next was this. The passage also, in verses 2 and 3, you will find out that the king of the city of Jericho was informed that there were 2 spies staying in the house of Rahab. Now, the question that came into my mind was, how did this person who reported to the king, how did he know that these 2 were spies? How did he know that these 2 came from Israel or came from the children of God? We do not know. But the most reasonable thing that I could imagine is that because these inns, these houses managed by harlots or prostitutes, were known to be places of transients or foreigners coming to the city. And it has been known also that these places were often visited by spies. And if there are meetings na hindi maganda, may planong i-overthrow ang king, often nagmi-meet sila sa mga ganitong bahay. And because of that common practice, most likely the king of Jericho already set up his informants sa mga bahay na yon, so that kung merong suspicious na mga tao, they can watch over them and they can report to him whatever their plans are. And so probably that happened. And so the king was informed, and this man went to the king and told him that there are 2 spies in the house of the harlot Rahab. The king sent his army to capture them. But what happened next was, when the king's army arrived, Rahab opened the door and told them that they were here, but they already left. She tried to cover up, she tried to protect them, when in fact they were on the rooftop. Now, this became a passage of many people asking the questions, does God tolerate lying? Lie is always a sin, I believe. And God does not tolerate lies. But people would say, why did he tolerate Rahab? You know, Rahab believed in Yahweh already that time, but this kind of belief did not affect yet her moral way of living. You can see Christians even today lying still. Does the person believe in Christ? Yes. But does he lie? Sometimes. You see, sometimes our belief is not yet fully affecting our moral way of living. And this happened to Rahab. And so she tried to protect the spies. Sabi nila, the end justifies the means. I don't believe in that. Because for the Lord, if it's evil, it's really evil. If it's wrong, it's really wrong. No matter or regardless what your motivation is for doing such a thing, it would always be wrong. That's the standard of our God. As a holy God, He does not tolerate evil. But that happened. Rahab protected the spies. And after which, so the armies left already, and then it was nighttime. Rahab went to the roof deck and talked to the spies. The passage that we read is a portion of their conversation, actually. And I want us to visit this time the very words of the harlot. Her speech, I think if I'm going to observe in the whole Bible, this is one of the longest speeches of women in the Bible that is uninterrupted. So let us look at, on the same chapter, the speech of Rahab started in verse 9. Listen to her words. She went up to the roof deck, and these were the words that came out of her mouth, talking to the 2 spies. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all of the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven and heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household and give me a pledge of truth. And spare my father and my mother and my brothers and sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. Now, I have mentioned to you earlier that the whole chapter actually is filled with the theme of fear. And this theme is clearly expressed through the wordings of the harlot here, Rahab. I want us to take note that beginning with verse 9, her speech was started, and immediately at the very first lines, you would be able to see that fear has gripped her heart. The words was like this: the terror of you has fallen on us. Another line that expresses the same feeling: the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. On the same verse, verse 9, and continued in verse 11, our hearts melted. Move forward, in the same verse, no courage remained in any man in Jericho. Forward to verse 24, all the inhabitants of the land melted away before us. All these statements, they are all actually saying the same thing. Everyone is afraid. For of what? Of the coming of God's children. They were so scared. And what was the reason why they were afraid of the coming of the children of God? Can't they fight against them? Don't they have a fortified city? Don't they have very strong walls that can protect them from the enemies outside? Yes, they do have. But here are the reasons also that we could see out of the speech of Rahab. Look at this statement. The people of Jericho heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea. Now listen to this. In those days, when you go for a battle, the fight is not just about your army against my army, but the fight has also something to do with your God and my God. Is your army stronger than mine? Added to that question is your God stronger than my God? And that is why when you look at the statement of the harlot here, the people of Jericho heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea. I want us to look at this map. On this side, look at this side. There is a number there, number 1, a black dot, okay? Inside the black dot, there is number 1. That was the starting point of the journey of Israel because it was the land of Egypt. They were there for many years. And the people were crying out to God, free us, Lord. And God heard their cry, and so He sent Moses to free them. It's on this side. And when Moses brought them out of Egypt, they traveled going south to Sukkoth, and then they reached that place that is called their Piharirot in number 3, and they ended up on a place where they were just facing the sea and there was no more land to run. And it was on that place, yung nilagyan ko ng red na arrow, that God parted the sea right in front of His children. And this news arrived among the inhabitants of the city of Jericho. It was very clear here that they were scared of the Israelites, not because of the armies that they have. They were scared of the Israelites because of the God who leads them out of Egypt. Added to that reason is this. They heard how Israel destroyed Sihon and Og. And if you want to know the story of that particular account, you go to Numbers 21, verses 21 to 35. And this time, can we go to the map again? Next slide, please. This time, they already traveled, I'll move here, from Egypt going south, and then they went down to Marah. After they crossed the Red Sea, they went down to Marah, to Elim, and they traveled there in the wilderness for decades. Supposedly, they would be in Israel on the same year if they would travel on foot. It's just near, okay? Egypt and Israel are neighboring countries. But it took them many years because their hearts were stubborn. And as I have mentioned to you earlier, their hearts were not ready to receive the blessing of the promised land. And so they went down to the south and they wandered in the wilderness. They went to Mount Sinai and they received the commandments of God. And they continued to wander and they went there up in the number 11, and went up to Kadesh Barnea, and then wandered again, and went down to Ezion Geber, and now they are there on the second arrow that I have made, and number 14, in Moab. They have crossed Moab already, going to the border of Arnon, and now they are near the river of Jordan. And then if you reach the river, if this is the river, they were here, and Jericho was on the other side of the river. So they need to conquer Jericho for them to conquer the rest of the cities within the promised land. Okay? And what happened was, when they were in Moab, they were about to cross Arnon, they came across with these two kings, Hishon and Og. And you know, the Israelites told them, King, O king, the king of this land, we are friendly. We just want to pass through your place. We don't desire to wage war against you. We don't have the intention of destroying your city. We just like to ask permission from you. Let us pass. And you know, these two kings, based on the accounts in Numbers, instead of letting the Israelites pass, they gathered their armies and they waged war against God's children. And you know what happens if you go for a war against God? They were totally destroyed by the Israelites. And after that, this news also arrived and reached the people in Jericho. So imagine that. They heard this God who parts the sea so that his children can pass. She heard about this God who can destroy kings, who will stop the Israelites from conquering the promised land. She knew that God already. And that is why she was so scared, so afraid. And these events mentioned, these two events that I have mentioned, the parting of the sea and the conquering or destroying the kingdom of Og and the other king, they were all mentioned where they were believed to have happened because of God. Not only of the strength of the Israelites, but because of the God who leads them, because of the God who carries them from the land of Egypt, going to the land that was promised for them. And the harlot knew this. Kaya sabi niya, I know the Lord has given you the land. I know you are still coming, but I know already that this land, including this city, has already been given by God to you. So she's a believer of Yahweh. He is the God of heaven above and on earth beneath. These were the words that came out of her mouth. Swear to me by the Lord, sabi niya. Can you please spare our lives? By the time you will come and you will arrive in our city and destroy everything, please spare my life and the lives of those within the household of my father. Please. And so the two spies responded to her, because you treated well, you protected us, you treated us well, protected us, then we will get into such a covenant with you. We will spare your life. We will not destroy you and your father's household. And that feeling of fear in the heart of Rahab was transformed now into a different sense. That feeling of fear and sense of defeat are experienced by this harlot, but it has been changed into something else, to faith in that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. And listen to this. The feeling of fear and sense of defeat are experienced out of self-reliance. They are inner signals calling for a change of trust. The people living in Jericho, they trusted that their walls can protect them. They trusted that their armies can protect them from their enemies. But this time, something that is much bigger than they are, something that is perceived to be very strong, something that is perceived to be ultimately powerful than any known person or being that they have ever imagined. The God of Israel is coming. And our protection, our army could not hold against this attack. We are scared. Self-reliant, and now they are becoming even scared about the things that are about to happen. This is an inner signal, my friends, when you are relying on yourself, when we rely on ourselves, and when something is bigger and we see and sense that what we have actually cannot stop, cannot go against that's something that is coming, I think it is a good signal for us to change our trust. Change the trust from yourself to someone bigger than yourself. And in this sense, Rahab saw that coming. She said, I cannot trust the city gates. I cannot trust the city walls. I cannot trust the army of our city. But I can rely on that God of Israel that is coming, who's going to destroy our city. And so the two spies said, okay, just let us go, and then we will agree with this covenant that you have made with us for us to make an oath. So what happened was, sabi ni Rahab, okay. So she lowered down the rope and they went out of the window. The city of Jericho has a very thick wall. And then the house of Rahab is actually part of the wall. So if you enter her house from inside, you pass through the window, you are already outside. Okay? Yun yung bahay ni Rahab. And so the spies went through the window, lowered the rope there, and then they went down and escaped. But before they left, sabi nila kay Rahab, by the time we come here, you tie this scarlet thread on your window. You tie this. So that in their minds, when the armies of Israel would come, when the invasion will start, the armies of Israel would see the scarlet thread on the window of the house of Rahab, and they will not attack her house, and they will not ransack her house, and they will not kill anybody inside her house. So the scarlet thread will become now a means for salvation in the lives of those who are in the house of Rahab. But did it happen that way? No. It did not happen that way. Why? Because if you move forward to the 6th chapter of the book of Joshua, the time for them to enter or invade the city of Jericho, they marched from they were, and they went there, and you know what they did? They marched around the city, outside the city walls, on the first day once. On the second day, they marched again around outside the city walls. Second day, once. On the third day, another one march. Fourth day, another one march. Fifth day, one march. Sixth day, one march. On the seventh day, they marched for 7 times. After the last march, they shouted the voice of victory. And after they shouted, the walls of Jericho fell down. Listen. Did they attack the walls and by themselves destroy it? No. It was God who destroyed the city walls. The scarlet thread now that was hanging on the window of Rahab did not become a means of salvation, but the scarlet thread actually became an inscription that says, this household belongs to God. And that is why, if you think about it, the scarlet thread was there. Instead of the armies looking at it, we will not destroy this house because this has the scarlet thread. We will not enter this house and destroy the people inside. It did not happen because they just shouted the voice of victory, and God Himself crumpled down the walls of Jericho. And listen to this. If I am going to imagine about it, the whole city was surrounded by the walls. And when they shouted on the 7th day, all parts of the walls was destroyed, and the only part that remained standing was the house of Rahab. Did they invade and ransack the house? No. Why? Because the scarlet thread was there. As far as the spies were concerned, it was a means of salvation. But as far as God is concerned, the presence of the scarlet thread was His way of saying, do not touch this house belongs to me. My friends, if you imagine about the journey of Israel, on the very last day in the land of Egypt, God told His children, you slaughter a sheep, get the blood and mark the blood of the sheep on the doorpost. When the angel of death came, the angel of death just passed over those houses with the mark of the blood of the Lamb on the doorpost. Why? Because when the angel of death saw it, he said, I cannot touch this. This house belongs to God. After many years of wandering in the wilderness, they traveled and they arrived in Jericho. When they shouted the voice of victory, God destroyed the city walls, except the house of Rahab. Why? Because the scarlet thread was there, and the scarlet thread declares that this house belongs to God. After thousands of years, the Son of Heaven came to earth, died for people like you and me. And Satan is always there, as expressed in the book of John, that the devil would come like a thief, and he comes to destroy and to kill. But to those who put their faith in Jesus, when Satan comes to you, he would say, I cannot touch this, because God has put the mark of his blood in this person's life. This person belongs to God. Your seatmate, you yourself, when you put your faith on Jesus Christ, the enemy cannot touch you, because that mark that Christ has put in you would tell the world and tell all of the enemies, you cannot touch this, because that person belongs to me. To God be the glory.